August 20th, 1942. Guadalcanal, Solomon Islands, the Tenaru River. The jungle breathes in the darkness, a wet living thing that presses against the marine positions dug into the sandbar. Private First Class Robert Leckie lies in his foxhole, M1903 Springfield across his chest, listening. Not to the insects, not to the rain dripping from palm fronds. He's listening for what shouldn't be there. 30 yards to his left, Corporal James Sullivan checks his weapon for the 5th time tonight. Not his rifle. The Winchester Model 12 pump-action shotgun propped against the mud wall of his fighting position. 20 inches of barrel, walnut stock darkened by sweat and humidity. 6 shells of WWII buckshot, 9 lead pellets per shell, each one .33 caliber. Sullivan doesn't know much about the weapon's history, doesn't know it was designed in 1912 by Thomas Crosley Johnson, doesn't know it replaced the Model 1897 as Winchester's premium pump-action. What he knows is this: 3 days ago, his lieutenant handed it to him with 5 boxes of shells and said, "Your point man when they come." When, not if. The word hangs in the tropical air, like the smell of rotting vegetation. Intelligence reports indicate Japanese forces landed west of their position 2 days ago. Colonel Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment, 916 men who'd slaughtered their way through China, warriors who'd been told American Marines were soft, undisciplined, frightened of close combat. Sullivan runs his thumb along the shotgun's receiver. The metal is slick with moisture. Everything here is wet: uniforms, ammunition, the very air they breathe. He'd fired the Winchester twice during training on the transport ship. The instructor, a gunnery sergeant from Tennessee with 3 rows of ribbons, had shown him something called slam firing. "Don't release the trigger," the gunny had said. "Just keep it pressed and work that pump, fast as you can." Sullivan had blown 6 shells into a floating crate in under 3 seconds. The spread pattern at 15 yards had been devastating, a cone of lead that turned wood into splinters. "German Haka-man tried to get these banned in the Great War," the gunny had continued, spitting tobacco juice into the Pacific. "Called them inhumane. Know what that means, Marine? Sir? Means they're real fucking effective." Now, crouched in this hole on the far edge of the world, Sullivan wonders if he'll remember how to do it when the shooting starts. His hands are steady, for now. But he's never killed a man. Never seen what 9.33 caliber pellets do to human flesh at close range. Across the perimeter, nearly 800 Marines wait. 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. Most of them teenagers. Many have been in combat before, some at Wake Island, others in the early desperate days after Pearl Harbor. But Guadalcanal is different. This isn't defensive fighting. This is holding ground they've taken, an airfield they've captured, real estate that matters. Henderson Field sits a mile behind them, named for a Marine aviator killed at Midway. The Japanese want it back, need it back. Without it, their supply lines to the southern Pacific collapse. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin Pollock moves through the positions, his boots silent in the sand. He stops at Sullivan's foxhole. "You good, Corporal?" "Yes, sir." Pollock looks at the shotgun. "Ever fire one of those in anger?" "No, sir." "Probably won't need it. They'll shell us first, maybe probe with a small force." He pauses. "But if they come hard, if they come at night?" He doesn't finish. Doesn't need to. They both know what he's saying. If the Japanese charge their positions in darkness, rifles won't be enough. The M1903 Springfield is accurate to 600 yards in daylight, worthless at 10 yards in pitch black, with enemies screaming toward you. That's when you need something else. something that doesn't require aim, only instinct and volume of fire. Pollock moves on. Sullivan settles deeper into his hole. 2 hours until dawn. Intelligence suggests if the Japanese attack, it'll be then. That gray period when darkness gives way to light, when exhausted sentries lose focus, when timing and surprise matter most. Sullivan checks the shotgun again. 6 in the tube, 1 in the chamber makes 7. He has 42 more shells in canvas bandoliers across his chest. 49 total. He does the math. At 9 pellets per shell, that's 441 projectiles. Enough to stop. He doesn't let himself finish that thought. In the command post, Colonel Clifton Cates studies a map by red-filtered flashlight. Radio reports from scouts indicate movement west of the Tenaru. Lots of movement. He's requested reinforcements from the reserve battalion, but knows they won't arrive before morning. The Marines on the line will have to hold with what they have. Cates knows something about Japanese tactics that most of his men don't. The Yamato Damashi, the warrior spirit that drives Japanese soldiers to attack even when tactical logic demands retreat. He's read the intelligence reports from China, the accounts of human wave assaults, banzai charges that sacrifice individual lives for collective honor. American doctrine emphasizes fire superiority, combined arms, tactical withdrawal when necessary. Japanese doctrine, at least the doctrine Ichiki's men have internalized, emphasizes spirit over firepower, aggression over defense, death over surrender. It's 2:00 hours, 4 hours until dawn. Sullivan tries to sleep but can't. His hand keeps finding the shotgun's pump, working it slightly, feeling the smooth action cycle. Press trigger, pump, press, pump. The muscle memory building as he lies still. He doesn't know that in 18 hours, journalists will call what happens here a massacre, that historians will describe it as one of the most one-sided battles in Marine Corps history, that his shotgun, this weapon the Germans called Inhumane, will become legendary among the men who survive. Right now, in the wet darkness of Guadalcanal, he only knows this. Something is coming. Something that will test whether American Marines can stand against warriors who've been told they're invincible. The jungle continues breathing. Somewhere in that darkness, 916 Japanese soldiers are moving into position. August 21st, 1942, 03:10 hours. The Tenaru River sandbar. Sullivan wakes to the sound that isn't a sound, the sudden absence of insect noise. The jungle has gone silent. Every Marine on the line feels it simultaneously, that animal awareness that prey develops when predators approach. Then the screaming starts. Not American screaming, Japanese voices, hundreds of them rising from the darkness west of the river. Banzai! Banzai! The word means 10,000 years, a wish for the emperor's eternal reign. But here, in this moment, it means one thing. They're coming. Sullivan's hands find the Winchester without thought. He shoulders the weapon, pointing into blackness so complete he can't see his own boots. The screaming grows louder, closer. Then the muzzle flashes begin. Rifle fire from the Japanese advance, wild shots meant to suppress, to terrify, to clear the way for what follows. Colonel Ichiki has planned this assault with precision learned in China. His 916 men, the 28th Infantry Regiment's lead element, have been promised easy victory. Intelligence officers told them the Americans on Guadalcanal number only 2,000, poorly supplied, demoralized, trapped. They've been told Marines won't fight at night, that Americans fear close combat, that one banzai charge will break their lines and open the path to Henderson Field.
Ichiki believes this because it worked before, in China, in Manchuria, against Chinese forces who broke when confronted with Japanese ferocity. He doesn't know, can't know, that the men dug in across the sandbar are different, that the United States Marine Corps has been preparing for exactly this kind of fight since its founding in 1775. The first wave hits the Marine positions at 0320 hours. Sullivan sees them as shadows against shadows, human shapes materializing from the jungle 30 yards away. He doesn't think, doesn't aim in any traditional sense. He points the Winchester like a man pointing a finger, presses the trigger, and pumps. The Model 12 slam fire mechanism does what Thomas Johnson designed it to do 30 years earlier.
As long as Sullivan keeps the trigger depressed and works the pump, the weapon fires. 6 shots in less than 3 seconds. 54 pellets of WWII buckshot spreading into the darkness at 1,200 feet per second. He doesn't see what hits. Doesn't see the first Japanese soldier, a corporal named Tanaka, who'd survived 3 years in China, take 4 pellets to the chest and throat. Doesn't see Tanaka fall, or the man behind him stumble over his body, or the cone of lead that turns that second man's face into red mist. Sullivan only knows the Winchester is empty. His hands move automatically. Left hand releases the forearm, right hand drops to the bandolier, finds 2 shells, thumbs them into the loading port. The action is smooth because the gunnery sergeant made him practice it 500 times on the transport ship. Muscle memory, the gunner had said. Your brain shuts down in combat. Your hands better know the work. All along the line, Marines are firing. M1903 Springfields crack in the darkness, the heavier thump of Browning automatic rifles. Someone has a .30 caliber machine gun working, red tracers drawing lines through the night. But these weapons require aimed fire, and aimed fire requires targets you can see. Sullivan fires into shadows, into screaming, into the mass of humanity trying to overrun his position. 6 more shells. Pump, fire, pump, fire, pump, fire, reload. The Winchester's barrel is heating up. He can feel it through the walnut forearm, not painful yet, but warm, alive with friction and combustion. 20 yards to his right, Private Henderson goes down, bayonet through the shoulder. A Japanese soldier is in the foxhole, rifle raised for the killing stroke. Sullivan swings the Winchester, doesn't even shoulder it properly, just fires from the hip. The range is maybe 8 feet. The buckshot pattern hasn't spread much at that distance, still a tight cluster of 9 pellets moving as one mass. They hit the Japanese soldier in the side, just below the ribs, and punch completely through. Henderson is screaming. The Japanese soldier is down. Sullivan pumps the action, chambers another shell, scans for the next threat. His hearing is going, the constant gunfire in close quarters destroying his eardrums. Everything sounds underwater now, muffled, distant. But he can still hear the screaming. That never stops. The first wave breaks at 0335 hours. Not because the Japanese retreat. They don't do that. It breaks because there's no one left standing to continue forward. Bodies pile up in front of the Marine positions, some still moving, most not. Sullivan reloads. His hands are shaking now. He's burned through 18 shells, 162 pellets launched into the darkness. He has no idea how many men he's hit, doesn't want to know, doesn't let himself think about it. "Here they come again," someone shouts. The second wave is larger. Colonel Ichiki has committed his reserve companies, convinced that one more push will break the American line. His officers wave swords, actual swords, samurai blades carried into combat like it's still 1542 instead of 1942. They charge the sandbar, screaming banzai and Tenoheika banzai, long live the emperor. Sullivan fires, reloads, fires. The Winchester's barrel is hot now, hot enough that moisture in the air creates steam when it touches the metal. His shoulder aches from the recoil. Not heavy recoil, the Model 12 isn't brutal, but sustained fire takes a toll.
6 shells, reload. 6 shells, reload. The rhythm becomes automatic. His world narrows to this. Pump, fire, pump, fire. Find shells, reload. Pump, fire. Corporal Sullivan doesn't know that military analysts will later study this battle, that they'll note the effectiveness of shotguns in jungle warfare, particularly against massed infantry charges, that the Marine Corps will request more Model 12s for Pacific operations, partly based on what happens in the next 2 hours. All he knows is that men keep coming, and the Winchester keeps firing, and his foxhole is surrounded by empty brass casings that gleam dully in the muzzle flashes. At 04:30 a.m., dawn begins breaking. The darkness that gave Ichiki's men cover now lifts like a curtain rising on a stage. And what Sullivan sees makes his hands stop working the pump. Bodies, hundreds of them, piled in front of the Marine positions in windows of dead and dying. The sandbar is carpeted with Japanese soldiers, some still crawling, most still. The Tenaru River runs red. Not metaphorically, actually red with blood. Sullivan turns and vomits into his foxhole. August 21st, 1942, 05:45 hours, the Tenaru River. Lieutenant Colonel Pollock moves through the positions as gray dawn becomes morning light. He steps carefully, avoiding the bodies, the blood-soaked sand, the equipment scattered across the battlefield. He stops at Sullivan's foxhole. The corporal is sitting with his back against the foxhole wall, Winchester across his lap, staring at nothing. 42 empty shotgun shells surround him, brass casings half buried in sand and mud. Sullivan. No response. Corporal Sullivan. Sullivan's eyes focus. Sir? You hit? No, sir. Pollock looks at the Winchester, then at the field beyond. The shotgun's barrel is discolored from heat, blues and purples where the bluing has been burned away by sustained fire. The forearm shows scorch marks where Sullivan's left hand gripped it through the engagement. How many shells did you fire? Sullivan has to think about it. 42, sir? Maybe 43? Pollock does the math silently. Roughly 380 pellets of .00 buckshot. At the ranges they were fighting, 10 to 30 yards, the spread pattern would be tight, devastating. 9 pellets per shell, each one capable of stopping a man. He looks at the bodies clustered in front of Sullivan's position and estimates at least 20 Japanese soldiers down in that sector alone. Good work, Marine. Sullivan doesn't feel like it's good work. He feels sick, empty. His hands won't stop shaking. Colonel Cates arrives at the command post at 0600 hours with news from the western positions. The Japanese aren't retreating, they're regrouping. Ichiki has pulled survivors back into the jungle, approximately 400 men from his original 916. Radio intercepts suggest he's requesting permission to withdraw, but his superiors are ordering another attack. The concept of retreat doesn't exist in the Japanese military doctrine Ichiki was trained under. The Senjin-kun, the Imperial Japanese Army's field service code issued in 1941, explicitly forbids surrender. Article 8 states, "Do not live in shame as a prisoner, die to maintain honor." Withdrawal without permission equals shame. Shame equals dishonor, worse than death. So Ichiki will attack again. But Cates isn't waiting. He orders Lieutenant Colonel Leonard Cresswell to take the 1st Battalion, 1st Marines in a flanking maneuver, circle south, cross the Tenaru downstream, and hit the Japanese from behind while they're focused on the sandbar positions. Sullivan and the other Marines on the line receive orders to hold and prepare for counterattack. They clean weapons, redistribute ammunition, drink water that tastes like chlorine and metal from their canteens. Sullivan field strips the Winchester, removes the barrel, checks the chamber, wipes down the action with an oily rag. The weapon is filthy with powder residue and sand. He cleans it methodically, hands working automatically while his mind stays carefully blank. The Model 12's design proves itself now. Even after firing 42 shells in desperate circumstances, covered in sand and moisture, the action still cycles smoothly. The takedown system Winchester developed, a simple process requiring no tools, allows Sullivan to clean and reassemble the weapon in under 10 minutes. At 09:30 a.m., Cresswell's flanking force crosses the Tenaru downstream. They move through jungle so thick that visibility drops to 15 feet. Point men carry rising submachine guns and more Model 12 shotguns, weapons chosen specifically for close-quarters jungle warfare where long-range accuracy doesn't matter. The doctrine is evolving in real time. Before Guadalcanal, U.S. military thinking emphasized rifle marksmanship and long-range engagement. The M1903 Springfield is accurate to 600 yards. Marine Corps training focuses on hitting man-sized targets at 500 yards. But in the jungle, engagement ranges drop to 50 yards, often less, sometimes much less. That's where the Winchester Model 12 earns its reputation. Cresswell's Marines hit the Japanese positions from behind at 10:15 a.m. The fighting is savage, close range, often hand-to-hand. Corporal James Mitchell, carrying a Model 12, clears 3 bunkers in 15 minutes using slam fire technique. He exhausts his ammunition, picks up a fallen Marine's shotgun, and continues fighting. The Japanese soldiers, veterans of China, who've never faced shotgun fire, die in clusters, unable to close the distance before buckshot cuts them down. By 11 a.m., it's over. Colonel Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment ceases to exist as a fighting force. Of 916 men who attacked the Marine positions, 777 are dead. Another 128 are wounded and scattered in the jungle. Only 15 make it back to Japanese lines west of the Guadalcanal River. Ichiki himself survives the battle, but not the shame. That evening, he burns his regimental colors and shoots himself. His second-in-command, Major Kuramoto, leads the handful of survivors.
Survivors west and reports the disaster to 17th Army Headquarters. The message is brief. 28th Infantry Regiment destroyed. American Marines extremely fierce. Request immediate reinforcement. Sullivan learns these details later, much later. Right now, at 11:30 hours on August 21st, he's walking through the battlefield with the rest of his platoon, checking bodies for intelligence documents, weapons, anything useful. He sees what his Winchester did at close range. Sees with 54 pellets of WWII buckshot due to human torsos, limbs, faces. He turns away and focuses on the mechanical task. Check pockets, collect documents, move to the next body. Don't think, don't feel, just work. A chaplain moves through the field, offering what comfort he can. He stops near Sullivan, looks at the Winchester still slung on the corporal's shoulder. That weapon saved lives today, son. Ours, not theirs. Sullivan nods, but doesn't speak. The chaplain moves on. August 23, 1942. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal. 2 days after the battle, Sullivan sits in a supply tent while an ordnance sergeant examines his Winchester Model 12. The sergeant, a career Marine named Patterson with 22 years in service, runs his fingers along the discolored barrel, checks the action, peers down the bore with a flashlight. "How many rounds you say you put through this?" 42, Sergeant, maybe 43. Patterson whistles low. "And how long?" 2 hours, a little less. The sergeant sets the shotgun on a workbench and pulls out a technical manual, War Department Technical Manual TM9-285, covering U.S. military shotguns. He flips to the section on the Winchester Model 12. Says here, sustained fire can damage the barrel. You're supposed to let it cool between magazines. He looks at Sullivan. "You let it cool?" "No, Sergeant." "Didn't think so." Patterson picks up the weapon again, works the action. The action is smooth, precise, no binding or hesitation. "Damn thing still cycles perfect. Winchester built these tough." Sullivan learns the weapon's history while Patterson works. The Model 12 was designed by Thomas Crossley Johnson and introduced by Winchester in 1912 as a replacement for the Model 1897. It featured internal improvements, a rotating bolt, hammer disconnect safety, faster lock time. The action was smoother, more reliable, less prone to jamming with dirty ammunition.
The U.S. military started purchasing Model 12s in 1917 for trench warfare in World War I. They ordered the trench gun variant, 20-inch barrel, ventilated heat shield, bayonet lug. The same configuration Sullivan carried at the Tenaru. But it was the slam fire capability that made the weapon legendary. Most shotguns require the shooter to release the trigger between shots. Pull trigger, fire, release trigger. Pump action, pull trigger again. The Model 12's disconnector design allowed continuous fire as long as the trigger remained depressed. This wasn't a bug, it was an intentional feature that Winchester included from the weapon's initial design. In World War I, American soldiers used this feature to devastating effect in trench combat. They would point the Model 12 or its predecessor, the Model 1897, into German trenches and pump shells as fast as they could work the action. 6 to 8 shells in under 3 seconds. The effect on massed infantry at close range was catastrophic. So catastrophic that the German government filed a formal diplomatic protest in 1918. They claimed shotguns violated international law, specifically the Hague Convention's prohibition on weapons causing unnecessary suffering. The German diplomatic note stated, "The German government protests against the use of shotguns by American troops and calls attention to the fact that according to the law of war, every U.S. prisoner of war found to have in his possession such guns or ammunition belonging to it forfeits his life." The United States rejected the protest. Secretary of State Lansing replied that shotguns were not prohibited by any international agreement, that Germany's own forces used sawed-off shotguns, and that the protest was hypocritical, coming from the nation that introduced poison gas to modern warfare. The controversy died with the armistice in 1918, but the weapon's reputation survived. When World War II began, the U.S. military ordered thousands more Model 12 shotguns, primarily for guard duty, military police, and security work. Nobody planned to use them in frontline combat. Then came Guadalcanal. Patterson finishes his inspection. "This weapon's still serviceable. You want it back, or you want a rifle?" Sullivan looks at the Winchester. His hands remember the weight, the balance, the smooth pump action. He remembers firing in darkness, the muzzle flash illuminating screaming faces, the bodies falling, and the reload drill his hands performed without thought. "I'll keep it, Sergeant." "You're not a put thing to say about this stuff. I've known 45 rounds put through a shotgun longer than 2 hours. Winchester built these tough." Sullivan learns the weapon's history while Patterson works. The Model 12 was designed by Thomas Crossley Johnson and introduced by Winchester in 1912 as a replacement for the Model 1897. It featured internal improvements, a rotating bolt, hammer disconnect safety, faster lock time. The action was smoother, more reliable, less prone to jamming with dirty ammunition. The U.S. military started purchasing Model 12s in 1917 for trench warfare in World War I. They ordered the trench gun variant, 20-inch barrel, ventilated heat shield, bayonet lug. The same configuration Sullivan carried at the Tenaru. But it was the slam fire capability that made the weapon legendary. Most shotguns require the shooter to release the trigger between shots. Pull trigger, fire, release trigger. Pump action, pull trigger again. The Model 12's disconnector design allowed continuous fire as long as the trigger remained depressed. This wasn't a bug, it was an intentional feature that Winchester included from the weapon's initial design. In World War I, American soldiers used this feature to devastating effect in trench combat. They would point the Model 12 or its predecessor, the Model 1897, into German trenches and pump shells as fast as they could work the action. 6 to 8 shells in under 3 seconds. The effect on massed infantry at close range was catastrophic. So catastrophic that the German government filed a formal diplomatic protest in 1918. They claimed shotguns violated international law, specifically the Hague Convention's prohibition on weapons causing unnecessary suffering. The United States rejected the protest. Secretary of State Lansing replied that shotguns were not prohibited by any international agreement, that Germany's own forces used sawed-off shotguns, and that the protest was hypocritical, coming from the nation that introduced poison gas to modern warfare. The controversy died with the armistice in 1918, but the weapon's reputation survived. When World War II began, the U.S. military ordered thousands more Model 12 shotguns, primarily for guard duty, military police, and security work. Nobody planned to use them in frontline combat. Then came Guadalcanal. Patterson finishes his inspection. "This weapon's still serviceable. You want it back, or you want a rifle?" Sullivan looks at the Winchester. His hands remember the weight, the balance, the smooth pump action. He remembers firing in darkness, the muzzle flash illuminating screaming faces, the bodies falling, and the reload drill his hands performed without thought. "I'll keep it, Sergeant." Not a put thing to say about this stuff. I've known 45 rounds put through a shotgun longer than 2 hours. Winchester built these tough. Sullivan learns the weapon's history while Patterson works. The Model 12 was designed by Thomas Crossley Johnson and introduced by Winchester in 1912 as a replacement for the Model 1897. It featured internal improvements, a rotating bolt, hammer disconnect safety, faster lock time. The action was smoother, more reliable, less prone to jamming with dirty ammunition. The U.S. military started purchasing Model 12s in 1917 for trench warfare in World War I. They ordered the trench gun variant, 20-inch barrel, ventilated heat shield, bayonet lug. The same configuration Sullivan carried at the Tenaru. But it was the slam fire capability that made the weapon legendary. Most shotguns require the shooter to release the trigger between shots. Pull trigger, fire, release trigger, pump action, pull trigger again. The Model 12's disconnector design allowed continuous fire as long as the trigger remained depressed. This wasn't a bug, it was an intentional feature that Winchester included from the weapon's initial design. In World War I, American soldiers used this feature to devastating effect in trench combat. They would point the Model 12 or its predecessor, the Model 1897, into German trenches and pump shells as fast as they could work the action. 6 to 8 shells in under 3 seconds. The effect on massed infantry at close range was catastrophic. So catastrophic that the German government filed a formal diplomatic protest in 1918. They claimed shotguns violated international law, specifically the Hague Convention's prohibition on weapons causing unnecessary suffering. The United States rejected the protest. Secretary of State Lansing replied that shotguns were not prohibited by any international agreement, that Germany's own forces used sawed-off shotguns, and that the protest was hypocritical, coming from the nation that introduced poison gas to modern warfare. The controversy died with the armistice in 1918, but the weapon's reputation survived. When World War II began, the U.S. military ordered thousands more Model 12 shotguns, primarily for guard duty, military police, and security work. Nobody planned to use them in frontline combat. Then came Guadalcanal. Patterson finishes his inspection. "This weapon's still serviceable. You want it back, or you want a rifle?" Sullivan looks at the Winchester. His hands remember the weight, the balance, the smooth pump action. He remembers firing in darkness, the muzzle flash illuminating screaming faces, the bodies falling, the reload drill his hands performed without thought. "I'll keep it, Sergeant." Patterson nods. "Good. We're getting more requests for shotguns from platoon commanders. Seems word got around about what happened at the Tenaru." He hands the weapon back. "Command is calling it a decisive victory. 700-plus enemy killed for 44 Marine casualties. That's the kind of ratio that wins wars." Sullivan takes the Winchester and leaves without responding. Numbers don't mean what they mean to Patterson. 700 dead men weren't a ratio when you were the one pulling the trigger. But he keeps the shotgun. Over the following months, the Winchester Model 12's role in Pacific combat expands. Marine Corps Headquarters in Washington receives reports from Guadalcanal, then from Tarawa, Peleliu, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. The reports note the shotgun's effectiveness in bunker clearing, tunnel fighting, and night defense. They note the psychological impact. Japanese soldiers trained to close with bayonets find themselves cut down before they can reach American positions. The Model 12 becomes standard issue for point men, tunnel rats, and night sentries. Production increases. Winchester manufactures approximately 80,000 Model 12 shotguns for military use during World War II. They serve in every theater, but prove most effective in the Pacific, where engagement ranges are short and vegetation limits visibility. The German protest from World War I is never repeated by Japan, though Japanese soldiers capture Model 12s and report them to headquarters as especially cruel weapons. But there's no diplomatic channel for protest. The war is total, unconditional, fought to the finish. February 1943, Guadalcanal, Henderson Field. The Japanese evacuate their remaining forces from Guadalcanal on February 7th. Operation K, the withdrawal of 10,652 soldiers from Cape Esperance, marks the end of 6 months of brutal fighting. The Americans have won. Henderson Field remains in Allied hands. The supply line to Australia is secure. Sullivan stands on the beach where he first landed 7 months earlier and watches Japanese destroyers disappear over the horizon. They're running. Actually running. The supposedly invincible Japanese army is retreating from an island they swore to hold. The Winchester Model 12 is slung over his shoulder. It's the same weapon he carried at the Tenaru, though the barrel has been replaced once and the stock twice. The original walnut stock cracked during fighting at the Tenaru. The second stock splintered when he used the weapon as a club in close combat. This third stock is darker, denser wood, probably from a different production batch. But the receiver is original. The action is original. The mechanism that Thomas Crossley Johnson designed in 1912, the rotating bolt, the disconnector that allows slam fire, the takedown system that requires no tools, still works exactly as designed. Patterson, the ordnance sergeant, approaches with a clipboard. He's conducting an after-action equipment survey for Marine Corps headquarters. "How many shells you figure you fired total, Corporal?" Sullivan has to think. The Tenaru, the Tenaru, Edson's Ridge, the November Offensive, dozens of smaller engagements, night attacks, perimeter defense. 300? Maybe more. Weapon ever jam? Once. Bad shell. Crimping was loose. Patterson makes a note. Aside from that bad shell, any malfunctions attributable to the weapon itself? No, Sergeant. Any difficulty with maintenance in jungle conditions? Sullivan thinks about cleaning the Winchester in monsoon rain, in mud, in humidity that rusted everything metal within hours. No more than any other weapon, less than most. Patterson makes more notes. These surveys are being collected across the Pacific Theater, compiled into reports that will influence military procurement for the rest of the war and beyond. The Winchester Model 12's performance on Guadalcanal, its reliability, effectiveness, and psychological impact will be cited in these reports. But Sullivan doesn't know this. Doesn't know that military historians will call the Tenaru one of the most decisive small unit actions in Marine Corps history. Doesn't know that the shotgun's role in that battle will become legend, passed down through generations of Marines in training courses and unit histories. He only knows this: the weapon worked when it needed to work. It didn't jam, it didn't break. When Japanese soldiers charged his position screaming banzai, the Winchester fired 6 shells in 3 seconds and kept firing until the trigger work was done. That's all any weapon needs to do. The final tallies from Guadalcanal tell the story in stark mathematics. The Battle of the Tenaru, 777 Japanese killed, 44 Marines killed or wounded. The entire Guadalcanal campaign, approximately 31,000 Japanese casualties versus 7,100 American casualties, one of the most lopsided campaigns in the Pacific War. The Winchester Model 12 didn't win the battle alone. Artillery, machine guns, rifles, air support, naval gunfire all played roles. But in the close-quarters jungle fighting that defined Guadalcanal, in the desperate night defenses against banzai charges, the shotgun proved irreplaceable. Production continued through 1963. Winchester manufactured over 2 million Model 12 shotguns, military, police, and civilian versions. The design was so successful that modern shotguns still copy features Johnson invented in 1912. The slam-fire capability, the feature that made it so effective in combat, was eventually discontinued in later shotgun designs due to safety concerns in civilian use. But for Marines fighting in the Pacific, that capability meant the difference between holding a position and being overrun. Sullivan survived Guadalcanal. He survived Tarawa. He made it home in 1945 with a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and memories he never discussed. The Winchester Model 12 he carried at the Tenaru was turned into the armory at Camp Pendleton and likely scrapped years later when the Marine Corps transitioned to semi-automatic shotguns. But the weapon's legacy endures. In museums, in military histories, in the collective memory of the Marine Corps. The shotgun that Germany tried to ban in World War I became the weapon that helped stop Japanese expansion in the Pacific in World War II. Colonel Ichiki's soldiers never imagined that Winchester Model 12 trench guns would slam fire through their lines. They expected Marines to break under the pressure of banzai charges, to falter in close combat, to surrender when faced with Japanese fighting spirit. Instead, they met men like Corporal Sullivan, scared, exhausted, but well-trained and well-armed. They met a weapon system designed for exactly this kind of fighting. They met American industrial capacity, military logistics, and combat doctrine that emphasized firepower over spirit, combined arms over individual bravery, victory over honor. The Japanese learned these lessons the hard way in the darkness at the Tenaru River, under a cone of buckshot fired from a pump-action shotgun that should have been impossible to fire that fast, but did it anyway because one engineer in 1912 designed the action correctly. That's the nature of technological warfare. The best soldiers in the world, motivated by the strongest warrior code, armed with good weapons and led by experienced officers, none of it matters if the other side has better tools and knows how to use them. The Winchester Model 12 was one of those tools, and on Guadalcanal, it proved Thomas Edison's maxim about American warfare: the side that can deliver the most lead wins. Sullivan delivered 380 pellets of WWII buckshot in 2 hours at the Tenaru. Multiply that by the hundreds of Marines carrying shotguns across the Pacific, through hundreds of engagements, and you understand why the Japanese fought so desperately and died so badly in the jungle campaigns of 1942 to 1945. They were brave, they were skilled, they were determined. But they never imagined what 6 shells of buckshot could do in 3 seconds.